I think I'm going to go ahead and start. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. This is a really important opportunity to be speaking with two people who have been, in many ways, leading the fight against anti-abortion and for reproductive justice and rights in both this country as well as in Colombia. We have Maria Paula from Colombia who's joining us and who will be giving us her experience and talking about their recent victories in Colombia. I just want to let you know that we will be giving each of the panelists around 10 minutes to talk, and then we'll be opening the floor to questions from the audience. So you'll be able to write in your questions. I'll bundle them together and I'll allow Kim and Maria Paula to answer them. So I wanted to say, first of all, a huge welcome to Maria Paula. She will be one of the speakers today. She is a founder and leader of the medical group for the right to decide in Colombia, Global Doctors for Choice, a member of the group of Just Cause, and she's a member of the Socialist Workers' Party of Colombia. We also have as a panelist, Kim. She is a socialist reproductive activist in the US who has been in the fight for over 30 years. She's been organizing speakouts in Wisconsin since the Texas so-called heartbeat bill was announced. And she is currently involved in local and national coalition building. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to open with some comments contextualizing this moment in the US before I hand it over to Kim and Maria Paula. So in the less than 2 months since the overturning of Roe, 8 states have banned abortions in almost all cases, and another 4 states in the US now ban abortion at 6 weeks of pregnancy. This is, of course, before most people know they are even pregnant. The immediate response to this decision has been heartening, and we're here today to discuss how to continue to build an independent mass movement like the ones our comrades in Colombia have built. On July 4th, we saw hundreds of people take to the streets, in many cases from independent reproductive health or socialist organizations. It's noteworthy that the liberal leadership of the women's movement was largely absent from these initial mobilizations. As socialists, we have a real opening to influence the course of what will happen in a post-Roe US. The Supreme Court ruling on Roe, while a critical gain for the movement in the 60s and 70s, was never enough. Argued around the right to privacy, the right to an abortion has never been an absolute right to terminate a pregnancy. Limited to a legal interpretation of the 14th Amendment, just 4 years after the 1972 decision, Roe was already significantly watered down. The Hyde Amendment took away federal Medicaid coverage of abortion from people enrolled in the program, affecting the most oppressed and working class sectors of the population. By the time Roe fell 2 months ago, 90% of counties in the US were without a single abortion provider, and thousands of laws further restricted the right to an abortion. When you hear people in this moment with rightful anger in their voices ask, "Where have you been?" this is what they are referring to. For most people, abortion and reproductive health care has been inaccessible in the US for decades. How did we get here? Because the Supreme Court decision atomized the movement that had won these first steps, and because the leadership of the movement was given over to reformists and opportunists, the solution to the Hyde Amendment was not to reactivate the mass mobilizations that had won these initial gains, but to leave it to the courts. This resulted in fracturing of mass mobilizations, and those communities abandoned by the mass movement were left to organize on their own, in many cases through mutual aid type organizations. For these communities, that support was critical. particularly to the most marginalized in the US, from overwhelmingly Black, immigrant, Latino, and Indigenous sectors of the population. Today, Black and Indigenous women in the US are around 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women. This is why we have to be conscientious that what we are fighting for goes beyond just the right to an abortion. The fight for reproductive autonomy and access to healthcare is what undergirds this struggle. For Black women in the 1960s, the Mississippi appendectomy resulted in the forced sterilization of perhaps 60% of that state's Black female population. In a post-Roe world, we are seeing a spike in the policing of women and childbearing people's bodies. In just the last 5 to 10 years, the number of people arrested and prosecuted for crimes related to stillbirths, miscarriages, and alleged drug and alcohol use during pregnancy has increased dramatically. And it should not surprise us that Black, Indigenous, Latina, and immigrant people already over-policed are disproportionately the targets of this policing. We have to take stock of this history because it explains why, at this moment, the overwhelming reaction to the end of Roe has been to double down on abortion funds. Whether this be for travel, procedure, or medication abortion, people are looking for an immediate solution that responds to the urgency of the situation. In a context where the mass movement historically abandoned the most oppressed, this response is understandable, but it won't be enough. We can't give up on forming an independent democratic mass movement that shows up in the streets to win this fight. Bourgeois news outlets are pushing to frame the fight as a legal one currently, over whether you'll be able to order abortion pills through the mail. This is no mistake, as it follows logically to then claim we must vote for the Democrats again to save any last hope for the right to an abortion. So long as Biden or a Democrat is in office, it goes, the federal government won't crack down on the mailing of abortion pills from one state to another, so they argue. The ruling class, both Democrats and Republicans, want us to think that this fight isn't one we can participate in. It should be left to the legal stage rather than the streets, and according to them, so long as we have a Democrat in power, we should be fine. The link to electoralism, the midterms, and the 2024 election already is palpable, and we need to be unequivocal about the role that the Republicans and Democrats have played in ending the right to an abortion. The language and politics of the Democratic Party has been consistent. In the words of Hillary Clinton, the party's line has been for abortion to be rare. While he was simultaneously selling out to insurance companies on healthcare, Obama also preserved and strengthened the Hyde Amendment. The Biden administration can barely even utter the word abortion. There is absolutely no reason to believe that the Democrats are invested in protecting our right to one. And this is because the control over bodily autonomy has to do with a fight over who controls social reproduction. Birthing people and oppressed groups have been historically the last reserve in the surplus of labor, invited into the workplace or forced back into the domestic sphere depending on the needs of the capitalist class. The cost of taking a break from the workforce to care for a child or the elderly or the sick is supposed to be squeezed out of our wages, ones that continue to stagnate for the benefit of the capitalist class. We are expected to shoulder the costs of raising our children, caring for our families without extracting any wealth from the capitalist class, without their having to pay a dime towards contributing to the reproduction of the very workers they will later exploit. The Supreme Court decision on June 24th to overturn Roe versus Wade needs to be understood within the wider context of a brewing crisis of capitalism, one that is squeezing everyday workers to get the last drops of profit. We are witnessing the capitalist class in the US pauperize millions through the manipulation of the economy, creating inflation that makes our purchasing power less and less. These efforts increase the reserve army of labor, making the working class more desperate and making it easier to trade out one worker for another. In this context, we must be categorical that our enemies are the capitalist class, and the only way to win reproductive rights is by building an independent mass movement. This has to start locally. It is the work of people like Kim and others here who are building coalitions on the ground and stating that we are united. We are not going to repeat the mistakes of the past and let the most oppressed sectors of the population fall through the cracks. And we are going to win on demand and free abortions in this country. Our comrades in Colombia